Thank you so much. I have the pleasure of interviewing my new friend, John. John is a venture capitalist that many of you know. He's with Blue Run Ventures, and their focus is on global mobile companies. And he's invested in a few companies you might have heard of. PayPal, yeah, familiar. Waze, he's had some lovely exits. And today we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to actually flush out some of the things that he talked about at the Blue stage, and some of you might have just seen him on the Blue stage. So, John, I would love to ask you a question. You actually said that the way you look to the way you look to invest is 2 words: show you a big problem. Can you give me an example of big problem that you're excited about, that you've recently invested in, or something that you are keen to invest in?
Yeah. So, I think when you sort of think of Maslow's hierarchy, the first thing is to be relevant, and it's by being relevant, it's like make a difference in people's lives. People are very rational, and they vote with their time, and so I try to stay away from things that look faddish to me. I'm not particularly cool, so I can't necessarily predict what's cool, but I do like to put myself in the shoes of a regular person and think about, am I going to create some sort of episodic relationship? So in the case of Waze, which is a good example because it's a recent exit, there were 2 things that made me excited. One was pretty boring. It was a data science problem, which made me super excited, which was, can we actually build a high quality, high fidelity map from a data signal of a mobile phone? The cool thing about that was most computer science guys would say yes, and most cartographer people would say no, which is a good thing. So that's a problem, and so I like that. So I look for that discordance to tell me that, hey, we're taking a bet, and so there's a problem here that people are disagreeing. And almost up until the very end, I don't think that many of the cartography people actually understood what we were doing, which was really cool, because if they did, they would have killed us, and we talked about it all the time. The next level of problem is, when I think of Waze, is making someone's life more efficient. I'm a little compulsive. We were talking about that earlier. I hate wasting time. I'm sure a lot of you hate to waste time. But to actually be able to make it so that if you use this product, I can tell you that you're going to get from point A to point B within a certain degree of accuracy, that's huge. And so that actually drives people back to it. And it then finally becomes something that, and this is why I do what I do, it actually becomes something that you can talk to real people about, like I can talk to my mom about. Frankly, we're all driven by different things, and to become relevant to your parents that you're just doing these odd bits and ends, but when suddenly you're breaking into sort of everyday life, that's what I mean by big problems.
And you also talked about that one of your, I wouldn't say, it's not your weakness, it's your love. What we want to see is something in terms of mobile that does utility and productivity. If any company comes to you and they're focused on utility and productivity in the mobile space, you're at least going to give them a listen. Yes?
Oh yeah. I think Waze is the beginning. The notion that we have to wait in line for things, I abhor a queue. I cannot do it. I'm pathologically disposed to get away from a queue. There's no reason for us to wait at the Department of Motor Vehicles in the United States. I have no idea what it's called in Finland, but it's literally the most inefficient place on earth. We should know. I mean, we have a computer in our pocket. There's an infrastructure that they're running. They're literally running like a ticker where you actually see sort of a number running. And there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people waiting to get up there. And often what happens is you get up there and you give them a piece of paper and they say, no, it's Form H, you need Form Z, and you have to go all the way back. I think that there's so many opportunities like that where we can start to bring efficiency in our daily lives. And so I think productivity and efficiency, just saving time, I get off on that. I think that's a lot more fun than me trying to figure out what a fashionable thing is. I'm not very fashionable, but I do understand, making a difference in everyday life. I think that's what drives me.
And talking more about the way you, not your investment philosophy, but some of the things that kind of the way you're investing, we started to touch on the fact that you're constantly trying to look 5 years into the future, right? And I think what you'd said, we talked about the timing and the importance of timing and how, frankly, sometimes companies can get it wrong. They can see something, you just talked about faddish, and try to jump on that bandwagon. You know, how do you look 5 years into the future, and don't you risk being wrong? Oh my gosh.
Well, I had a real break in my life. I worked for an entrepreneur by the name of Bill McGowan. He started a company called MCI, which is long forgotten, but it was
As an American, I know MCI very well.
So it was a great company, and we basically broke apart the Bell system. But he once said something to me, and I was pretty young, and I barely understood it. You know, he said a big market hides a lot of sins, and so I don't care if you're making mistakes. I mean, you're going to make mistakes, but if you're attacking a big problem, people don't necessarily notice, right? As long as the mistakes don't kill you, a startup's going to be able to adjust to it. So, I don't worry about making mistakes. I can live with that. As long as we're attacking a big enough problem, we'll figure it out. And I think that's why the entrepreneurs I've been fortunate enough to work with like to work with me. And, they will, the stories will be that I don't panic when you've made a wrong assumption that doesn't kill you, right?
Yeah, it's a calculated risk. How do you start to look 5 years in the future? Where, it's not even inspiration. You're starting to make bets. You're saying, okay, I see that trend and that trend converging, and I think it's going to go here. How do you?
It's really about avoiding categories. So it's really hard in a conference like this where there's so many talented people. I was on a panel where you're supposed to predict what comes next, so I'm almost changing. I don't want to change your path, right? If everybody adopts right now if I say one thing, then I've already created a problem. So I think the problem or the thing that I try to do, and I really encourage startups to do, is you have to think of where you are, but think of what's the likely exit horizon for your company. Is it 5 years? Is it 7 years? And of where things are today, what's likely to change by then? So, for example, I think that when you look at mobile apps in 2008, there was a paucity of good applications on smartphones. So that created a window. And that window is why we have such successful companies, like Rovio was able to create Angry Birds. Supercell is another great example. But you don't want to try to replicate what they've done because they've already done it. My example is the PayPal experience. Because I invested in PayPal, I see a lot of mobile payments companies, but the thing I have to always remind myself that I'm actually competing with the very company that we created and the brand that we created. And so I can't do the same thing again. And I think that you can fall into a trap. You have to actually think farther out, and it's better off I'd rather be alone than in a crowd. Being alone is sometimes scary, but actually, I feel safer there, and I think the best startups are often very, very lonely for a period of time. Just because everybody thinks you're crazy, you might be, but you also might be onto something really good.
Actually, another topic that we touched on, and actually I had a conversation with some friends in Estonia about this the other day, is creative destruction. And you actually went on record on the Blue Stage saying that you believe in creative destruction, and I'd love to have you define what that is and why it's so important.
It's not something I invented. It's actually, it's an economic term. I think Jorma Ollila actually was the first person to talk about it. The London School of Economics has actually talked about it. So what it really means to me is that these great brands, great company experiences that hopefully some of you have been fortunate enough to be part of. I've been fortunate a couple of times. You tend to attract fantastic talent, and the mission of what you're doing is what keeps the talent. The more talented the people, often the more volatile the company can be. So while you're together and you're held by the mission, it's fantastic. But when the mission's over, those talented people, they all have to go in different directions, right? They all have to start their own thing because they subjugated themselves to a broader mission. And that's what I mean by creative destruction, right? So, I think the fact that Nokia's gone through a lot of change here, which emotionally is an issue for me, which I'm working through, but I think it's actually a very, very good thing for the market. I think that there's a lot of talent. I see some of them here. I'm not going to call them out, but there's some talented people that have been dispersed out into the ecosystem that are here to help, I think, other companies or to start companies. And so that's what I mean by it. The advantage that Silicon Valley has is that we have more of that. And so, you have to sort of be realistic and embrace what's here, but I think there's enough critical mass here. That was clearly a world-changing company. So I think there's a lot of talent and a lot of things to learn from what they did and start something new.
And I'm going to actually have two last questions, but one thing that we touched on, and I actually saw it earlier on stage in the startup track, was alternatives to venture capital. And I know it's not a very popular topic, but I think it's important to talk about it. And it's something you and I started to talk about because you were saying that you were starting to talk about to be aware of easy money and to beware of easy money, I think was exactly what you were starting to head to. And do you mind talking a little bit more about why and what you mean?
Well, nobody gives you anything for free in life, and venture capitalists are no better, sometimes worse. There's an expectation when you take venture capital money. And so your business model or your business opportunity, if you don't have a model yet, should be able to meet the exit expectations of your investors. If you haven't figured that out yet, then that's probably a good time to take stock of whether it makes sense to just assume that you should go into a venture route, because fundamentally you're giving up ownership of your company. And dilution is something everybody needs to be more thoughtful about. VCs are going to dilute you. If you're in a business, say it's more of a science-oriented product, that maybe it's going to take 3 years, 5 years before you figure out whether this is something we can actually turn into a big exit, then you might be better off to take non-dilutive, government financing or different types of financing, which is actually more prevalent here than it is in the United States. We don't actually have a lot of the sort of resources relatively available to startups that you do here. So I'll do a commercial for him because he's a good friend. One of my friends now runs TechS, and that's a fantastic program. And so I think consider the options before you jump on the train, because it's not like the movie at all. Like the startup movies, I don't buy. This Facebook movie is false. There's a lot of tension, a lot of risk. There's a lot of ups and downs, and it's going to take you a long time. So I think be thoughtful about sort of what your financing plan is, and then always every move sets up the next move. So the type of capital you take, if it's not enough to take you to the end, you have to think about, okay, what are we going to accomplish with this capital to set up this next round, and what's the profile of that next round? You actually have to think about that all along the way. If you don't do that, you get yourself upside down. The worst thing that happens to companies, and it happens all over the world, is you get a cap table that doesn't make sense. And
Can you explain what that means, a cap table that doesn't make sense?
So you get ownership. You've given up too much ownership of your company, and you meet a great investor who you really would like them to be part of your company, but their model, they're like, I'm sorry, but I can't invest in you at this point because you've already given up 60% ownership of your company. So I say, guard ownership of your company very zealously, consider all the options, and really build your cap table over time to accommodate the kinds of talented and connected investors, or not necessarily talented, but connected investors that you need. You're the talent, but match your financial trajectory, your financial plan to the business model and the business system that you're trying to build.
And finally, John, I'd love to know what kind of companies should be approaching you. Maybe at, obviously we talked about mobile, but at what point in their growth? We've talked about some things that you love solving big problems, you like efficiency, productivity, utility, but at kind of what stage in their growth should they be talking to you to Blue Run?
That's a really hard question for me.
I did it on purpose.
Yeah. I try to be pretty responsive, quite honestly. So talking or giving feedback is something that I do all the time. And so, you can do that as long as it can be asynchronous, meaning it's email, then what I'm looking for is, are you coming up with a big problem that we have a commonality on? I kind of view myself as a human switch, so I try to tell you right away whether it fits or it doesn't, or whether I can reroute you to somebody else who's more appropriate. So as an idea, I actually enjoy the dialogue of an idea pretty early. As an investor, I think it's really about when you want to globalize. So I think that there's, I'm a little shocked at how much sort of venture activity has accelerated in Finland. I think there's plenty of capital here right now for you to get to sort of the proof stages. So you don't need, I don't really need to necessarily invest right now. It's when you've sort of gotten to that point where you want to globalize, that's actually when I want to invest. So when you really want to have a dialogue about what's our go-to-market, what are the markets we should go after? Who should we think about as competitors? That's what I live for, so that's what I'm always trying to do. I'm a relatively small fund, so I can't do that many things, but that's kind of how I make my decision. It's really about go-to-market.
Everyone, if you just join me in thanking John for spending so much time with us and answering so many questions. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.